Hello, my name is Brant Hunt, coming to you tonight, sharing some information from a particular book by Eustace Mullins. This is the book I'm going to be reading from, The Rape of Justice, being chapter 2. And chapter 2 is going to be dealing with what I would call the issue of the origin of law. Where did the law come from? Okay. So I'm hoping everyone had a good day. Temperatures today were in the 80s, low 80s here in South Carolina. Way too warm for people here. Myself, I actually got a short sleeve shirt on now. It's just way too early to be this warm in the year. And I noticed my neighbor today, he has a Bradford pear in his yard and the blooms are out. And so we have not had a winter this year at all. And we're going to pay for it in one way or the other here in the next few weeks. They've done this a couple of times here. They come back. The weather is controlled, it's manipulated, I should say. And what happens is simply we get a cold rush, and it causes issues with my fruit trees and other people's crops. And that's the type of people who rule this planet, folks. They desire to hurt people instead of actually building up people. They like to destroy. And that's their nature. So let's get into the book here, chapter 2, The Origin of Law. This is from the book, The Rape of Justice. It was written in 1989 by Eustace Mullins. Unfortunately, Eustace is no longer with us, but he left an incredible amount of data, information, whatever you want to call it, for us to read if we're willing to dig. So the law under which we live, that law which is now so liberally construed, altered, misinterpreted, and bent to private ends by members of the legal profession, has always been intended from its earliest records as a fixed power. The word law, in its pristine meaning, is recorded in its Old English root called law, L-A-U-H, or law, L-A-U-C-H-T, meaning laid, L-A-I-D, or fix. This in turn was early derived from the Aryan, A-R-Y-A-N, log, L-O-G-H, also meaning fix, and in the Teutonic root of lag, L-A-G, meaning to lie in a fixed manner and evenly. In Latin, it was lex, L-E-X, or law. In the Old French, L-O-I, a word similar to the earlier Aryan log, L-O-G-H. In previous civilizations, the law was not only regarded as a fixed power, it was deemed to originate in the heavens and in a godly rule. We find in the Cairo Museum a 19th century BC papyrus, the hymn to Amon-Ra. Hail to thee, Ra, Lord of law, Father of the gods, maker of men. Civilized nations have generally acknowledged that the ultimate source of the law and authority is the will of God, as it was codified in Scripture in Isaiah 2:3. The law shall come forth from Zion, in Micah 4:2. The law shall go forth from Zion, Isaiah 51 declares. Thus saith the Lord, hearken unto me, ye that know righteousness, the people in whose heart is my law. Fear you not the reproach of men. Neither be you afraid of their revilings, for the moth shall eat them up like a garment, and the worm shall eat them like wool. But my righteousness shall be forever, and my salvation from generation to generation. Sir William Blackstone, in his commentaries, a primary source in the English common law, states a profound belief in the origin of law. When the Supreme Being formed the universe and created matter out of nothing, he impressed certain principles upon that matter, from which it can never depart and without which it will cease to be. Blackstone's observation offered as an article of his faith has been remarkably verified by the modern discovery of DNA, the gene structure which controls our actions. The law, then, is not only the law of God, the law of men, and the law of our people, but it's also the law of nature, the very law which binds our physical being. This explains the multitude of psychosomatic illnesses which plague millions of people and which stem directly from the perversion of law and the rape of justice. In my book of Health, Murder by Injection, I quoted the great scientist Morley, that is Morley Roberts, on malignancy and evolution. Malignancy is diversion of energy from the high differential into the proliferation of low-grade epithelial, that's spelled epithelial, I'm saying it right, which can endure irritation, but only differential with difficulty. May we go further, even say that the common tendency to malignancy is the result of sociological refinement, which has for a higher role for epitome, spelled Epithelialia. In short, Morley Roberts is asking whether the widespread case of cancer are not due to sociological factors, which demand that we alter our genetic makeup in order to proliferate low-grade epithelium. The courts have led the way in this crusade, punishing the healthy and more productive members of society in favor of the deprived, the homeless, the malformed. This has been accompanied by the systematic debauchery of my monetary unit through international central bank manipulations, as I pointed out in Secrets of the Federal Reserve, impoverishing the healthy, productive members of society. By the way, I've already read from that book, Secrets of the Federal Reserve, and you're welcome to go back and look in my history with Discerning What Is True in my YouTube channel and also on my Odyssey channel. And also I'm sharing this on Facebook Live this evening with my name being Brant, B-R-A-N-T, last name Hunt, H-U-N-T. The subsequent ruin, in turn, has resulted in the weakening of our immune systems, creating the phenomena of AIDS, cancer, and many other degenerate types of illnesses. The first codification of law was recorded in civilization, acknowledged the importance of law to our human systems. Noah enjoined his sons to observe justice, to cover the shame of their flesh, to bless their Creator, to honor their father and mother, and to refrain from iniquity and uncleanness. These principles were later refined into the form in which we know today, or them as being the Ten Commandments. Man's very existence was predicated upon his obedience to the law of God. Tradition maintains that this law was formulated as a verbal acknowledgement of the covenant between God and his people. It entails considerations from both parties and thus was a legal and binding contract according to the established principles of law. However, this covenant did not encompass all the known population of the world, but merely that group known as God's people, that is, the people of Israel, as chronicled in the book of Genesis, the first book of the Bible. Man, that is, Adam, was rudder of complexion. This ruddiness was the conscious reminder of his dedication to upholding the law of God. Whenever he transgressed this law, he would blush in conscious acknowledgement that he has been disobedient. The blood would rush to his face in a visible blush as the mark of his disobedience and the reminder that he must fulfill the law. Because of this dedication, Adam had an immortal soul. His son Enoch, different from Adam because he was mortal. Henceforth, God's law would deal with the mortality of his people. God's later blessing, the seed of Isaac, because of Abraham obeyed my charge and kept my commandments and obeyed my law. Among Isaac's sons, a term later shortened to more popular uses as Saxons, was Jacob, whose name was later changed to Israel. Since that day, Israel has been the chosen people of God. Israel's sons, that is, the Saxons, brought God's law to the nations of the world as they immigrated and settled in other lands. This law was codified by the jurists of England, principally by Coke, C-O-K-E, and Blackstone. As the English law, it was later transformed after having been brought across the Atlantic Ocean by English colonists. As the Constitution of the United States, the Founding Fathers were acutely conscious of their precepts and their mission. Samuel Adams, the main instigator of the struggle for Americans' independence from England, declared, "We have come here to establish our Israel." The history of civilization has always been marked by the clearly defined milestone of codified law. In 2250 BC, the Code of Hammurabi was promulgated to establish law and justice in the land. We also have been greatly influenced by the Code of Roman Jurisprudence, which was administered as the ruling code of the world for some 1,300 years. Kent's Commentaries, the principal legal textbook for the American lawyers throughout the 19th century, notes Volume 1, page 556. The great body of the Roman or civil law was collected and digested by order of the Emperor Justinian. I'll spell it for you, Justiinian, in the former part of the 6th century. It exerts very considerable influence upon our own municipal laws. The Roman jurists developed the principle of jus naturale, that is, a code of laws which reflected the laws of nature and the natural order. In his commentaries, Blackstone expands upon this law of nature. The will of his maker is called the law of nature, being coeval with mankind and directed by God himself as a course superior in obligation to any other. It is a binding over the globe in all countries and all times. No human laws are of any validity if contrary to this. Blackstone also writes that revealed law is only scripture. Upon those two foundations, one, the law of nature, and two, the law of revelation, depend on all human laws. That is to say, no human law should be suffered to contradict them. This is in strange contrast to our present-day legal system, in which the rape of justice daily contradicts both the law of revelation and the law of nature, because it was developed over a period of many centuries. Roman law has ample time to respond to emerging problems brought on by historical growth. Founded by Romulus, it's Romulus, in 753 BC, Rome became a republic in the year 509 after the expulsion of the Etruscan kings. In 450 BC, the laws of the 12 tables were formulated. The earliest Roman law was the Jus Curatum. Now I'll spell that for you. Quiritium. That's Curatum, developed by the Curetans, who were the first families of the Republic. As patriarchs, the Curitan law was developed primarily to protect their families and their property. These families were known as gentes, Gentes, or the clans. Their descendants have since been known to history as gentlemen, as contrast to the less distinguished masses, or plebs, plebs, as the freemen or non-Gentiles were known. The Latin gentiles means belonging to the same clan or gentiles. In those European nations which developed from these Roman antecedents, the gents' descendants were known by the sobriquet gentil homme in France and as gentlemen, later aristocrats in England. The privilege arrogated by the first families, the gentlemen, became a source of constant criticism and contention from the plebs, plebs. In fact, ancient Rome soon developed into the two groups, which have remained fairly constant for 3,000 years, the older families, which held the majority of property, and the masses. In the 20th century, they are all usually known as Republicans and Communists. The essential difference between the two classes was that the patriarchs or gentlemen knew who their parents were, and the plebs, who paid little attention to such niceties, did not because of their family records. The patricians were able to hand down their property to their heirs, while the plebs, even if they prosper, had no family records with which to protect their holdings. This fundamental distinction led to the demands of the plebs that the government intervene to support them, demand which some 25 centuries later led to the Communist Manifesto and Karl Marx's demand that all inheritance be abolished. In the United States, this precept of communism was enshrined in punitive inheritance taxation and income taxes. Remember, the Constitution does not state there should be any kind of taxes on wages at all or taxation. The Curitan law in ancient Rome served to protect the family lines of the patrician families and to provide inheritance for their descendants, their rightful and acknowledged heirs. Property and inheritance laws have been a basic part of our laws since that time. Roman law was divided into the FAS, jus, Jus, and the Bonini, Boni, morals, Mores. By fast was understood that the will of the gods. The scholar Bereal, Breal, derives this word from the Greek onius, Oeuis, meaning the divinity of inspired words, the laws given by heaven for earth. Just also derived from the Sanskrit jura, that's Ju, to join, or bond, or unite, meaning the family bonds and ties which transcend the morality of man. This was later interpreted as the Jos, Jos, or Jos, Jous, or the Vedas, Vedas, and the Jax, Jes, or Jactos of the Zen Avesta. Boni mores was an essential ingredient of the maintenance of the patrician family. It meant dutiful service, respect, chastity, and fidelity to the law of contract, the law of the family. The stern family discipline of the Roman patricians, which enabled them to continue their family lives, was steadily battered by the rapidly multiplying plebs, whose mathematical proliferation and willingness to endure a lower standard of living resulting in their greater outnumbering the patricians. Under the pressure, the great landed estates were broken up into smaller, individually held parcels of property as the gentes or clans began to disintegrate. Heretofore, strict laws had governed the ownership of property in Rome. Heredity, that is, plots of land within the city proper, had been granted to the heads of the gentes, the leaders of the patricians. Our word heredity derives from this custom, referring to the passing on of these plots of land to the heirs of the patricians. Emboldened by their increasing numbers, the plebs began to demand more and more rights for themselves. The issuance of the 12 tables marked a watering down of the original Jus Curatum. This process was greatly enhanced with the Jus Civile, Civile. At the establishment of the Republic, our civil law derives its name from the outcomes of the centuries-long struggle between the patricians and the plebs. When the plebs insisted upon a law which granted them more privileges as civil laws, in 471 BC, the plebs celebrated their final triumph with the establishment of the tribunes as the expression of their newfound political power. Thus, the patrician age in Rome lasted a scant 300 years, a short period in a long history of Rome. Nevertheless, much of the power and organization of Rome continued to be based on the stern precepts of its founding patricians, just as much as the protection afforded to its citizens in the United States by the Constitution that has been laid down by the stern precepts of our founding fathers. Even today, our law-giving bodies are frequently referred to as tribunals, as recognized in the triumph of the plebs in Rome in 471 BC. In 445 BC, Canudulus, I'll just spell it to you, folks. Caius, Callius, Canuleius, Callicus, led the final assault of the plebs against the entrenched privileges of the patriotic families, who wrest from them the source of their continual power, the protection of their bloodlines. By very stringent and exclusive marriage bans, they had managed to preserve their bloodlines by prohibiting marriage with a pleb. Canutius now succeeded in overcoming this ancient prohibition. From that time on, plebs were allowed to marry into the patriotic families, or patrician families. Rome was now demoralized or democratized. You see, Rome was now democratized. With the democratization came the inevitable diminution of the powerful bloodlines which has so encouraged the ascension of Rome. Rome, in the time of its passage of a mere 3 centuries, had already begun her downhill road to decline. With the new democracy came increasing powers and growing complexities of the Roman legal system. Cicero was led to publicly denounce the well-known practice of bribing jurors. By the end of the 4th century BC, Animus Marcellius protested that we see the most violent and rapacious classes of men besieging the houses of the rich, cunning creating lawsuits. Doors are now daily more and more open to plunder by the depravity of judges and advocates who are all alike. Is that not what's happening in the United States? Interesting. Well done, Justice. I'm sorry, well done, Eustace Mullins. Remember now, Eustace Mullins was inspired by a gentleman, Ezra Pound, and where most of Eustace Mullins did his research was at the major university, not major library, that's actually the Library of Congress. And he got the books, what he needed to do, and he was able to do all this research on his own. We could remind Marcellius of the old saw that the more things change, the more they remain the same. Certainly his complaint could be echoed in any American city today. At the present time, our economy is imperiled by the burgeoning merger and acquisition activity among the large corporations as they prey upon and swallow up each other. That's correct. Corporations were well known in Roman law. The provisions for the establishment of corporations had been copied from the laws of Solon, Solon. Private companies were entitled to stay in business as long as they did nothing contrary to public law. Interesting saying. Let's say that again, folks. Private companies were entitled to stay in business as long as they did nothing contrary to public law. This precept was soon ignored, but Augustus and Julius Caesar were forced to dissolve the corporations because their nations create. I'm sorry. MACH. Somebody's sending me something here. The machinations created widespread fraction and discord among the people. It was during this crisis that a schism developed, which had remained fairly constant to the present time. The schism between the civil law, which was designed to protect the public, and the law merchant, or the law of commercial activities. Which was designed solely to protect the merchant. Although civil law takes into consideration of rights of the individual, commercial law only recognizes the stipulations of the contract. However, this might infringe upon the rights of the citizen. Also, commercial law was pragmatic in its origins, having developed strictly from mercantile operations, whereas civil law essentially was based upon religious precepts and the law of God. By 467 AD, Roman civil law, overtaken by historical developments, had reached the end of its legal authority. In 476, the Roman Catholic Church sought to recitate the power and authority of the ancient Roman law through its worldwide operations with the present-day version of the Roman Empire headquartered in the Vatican in Rome. The Roman Senate re-emerged as the Vatican College of Cardinals. In contrast to this development, England became the repository of the ancient laws of Isaac's sons, or Saxon laws. Three brands of this law were established there. That is, the Danes brought Dane Lag, that's L-A-G, the Danish law, in England. The West Saxons brought the West Saxon law to England, and the ancient Britons had their traditional Mercan lay, or Mercan laws. King Alfred the Great codified the English common law in 872 A.D. as the Dooms, D-O-O-M-S, of Alfred, taking his inspiration from the covenant of Moses. Let me take a break here. By this upholding of the contract with God, Alfred assumed the title of Great, G-R-E-A-T, becoming the representative of the people of Israel. Blackstone notes that the common law of England is generally founded in biblical principles. Albert the Great began his Dooms of Alfred with the Ten Commandments in the 11th century. Irenaeus Braxton blended the English common law with the Roman law as it has been revised in the Justin Code of 533 AD. This became operative in England as a Christian version of the Roman law. Hugo Grotius, a lawgiver whom one of our founding fathers, James Madison, called the father of the modern code of nations, firmly believed that God's law was superior to human laws. This view upheld Cicero's earlier contention that a law of the state, which was contradiction of natural law, could not be viewed as law. The Anglo-Saxons common law developed in three distinct steps. First, as a common law, second, as equity, and third, as providential enactments. Beg with me. Hold on just a second here. Did something here. Made it get back. Here we go. Piece right here. The Anglo-Saxon common law developed in three distinct steps. First is a common law, second is equity, and third is parliamentary enactment. Each development represented a further watering down and perversion of the original Teutonic or Anglo-Saxon precepts. In the United States, we had followed a similar path. That is, American law began as a constitutional law, the enshrinement of the ancient Teutonic strictness, which protected the rights of individuals from powerful lords, which today we call the state. Commercial legal requirements then gradually took over as equitable law or law merchant, continue subduing constitutional precepts of law, a process which typifies by the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution of the United States. These amendments controverted the original intent of the Constitution as congressional or parliamentary enactments, which were and are legislative powers delegated to the law merchant. By the way, we'll continue here. Included in these developments are the Federal Reserve Act, the Internal Revenue Service Code, and the National Recovery Act of the Roosevelt administration. The latter was overturned by the Supreme Court as obviously being unconstitutional. However, the Federal Reserve Act and the Internal Revenue Service have never been challenged before the Supreme Court. The principal fixture of the ancient Teutonic law, from which our common law derives, was vera gelt, that's V-E-R-A, gel, G-E-L-T, a legal principle which established the payment of compensation for death or injury, also known as mangold, M-A-N-N-G-O-L-D. It evolves into the term verge, W-E-R-G-E-L-D, under Saxon or Isaac's son's law. The amount of vergel was always stated in shillings. After William the Conqueror invaded England and established the power of the black nobility, there, you see, that's The Curse of Canaan by Eustace Mullins. That's another book that he wrote. The nation was once again divided into two classes, the foreign lords and the native-born population. The natives became known as borders or villigans. A border was a villigan of the lowest rank who held his college only at his lord's pleasure and only if he produced sufficient income to the lord to justify his continual presence. This became known as the legal principle of borderlands and jail, Anago, governed the land held by a border intended under the Anglican law, which was also known as villigans. The fundamental change in legal authority in England after the Norman conquest eliminated many of the principles of the ancient Anglo-Saxon law. However, it continued to be the basis of the legal system because it was so firmly rooted in long recognized Roman and Saxon precepts. These precepts could be traced all the way back to Alaric the Goth Visigoth, who issued laws for his Roman subject well before Justin. His code was known as Bavarian, B-R-E, Varian, V-I-A-R-I-U-M, Alarica, A-L-A-R-I-C-I, or the Lex Romanica Visigothium. In England, Alarican's precepts were preserved in Lex Salinica, circa around 500 A.D., in the Dooms of Eltenburg of 600 A.D., and in the Lex Santonum, S-A-X-O-M-O-N-U-M. However, legal historians often choose to ignore these precepts, preferring to attribute the development of the common law to Henry of Bratton, B-R-A-T-T-O-N, whose name was later corrupted to Bracton, B-R-A-C-T-O-N. He died in 1268 A.D. This historians claim that legal memory, that is, the record of our legal system, can only be traced through written precepts in the coronation of Richard I in 1189. Bracton served King Henry III for many years as the model for Henry's justice. His legal work was based upon the treatise of Azor, A-Z-O, of Bologna, who is remembered as master of all the matters of law. Bracton in turn served as the model for the most litigious name in English common law, Sir Edward Coke, C-O-K-E. Sir Edward Coke, 1552 to 1634, was born of an old Norfolk family, which traces lineage back to William McCoke of Deleganton, D-E-D-L-O-N-G-T-O-N, in 1206. Coke not only managed to codify the English common law in his institutes, he was also embroiled in most of the major political disputes of his time. He was born to the lord of the manor of Milham Milkham, at the age of 19. He began to study law in 1571 at Clifford's Inn at the Inner Temple in London. He completed his studies some 7 years later in 1578 and was called to the bar on April 20th of that year. His first marriage, that is 1582, was a fortunate one. He married Bridget, the daughter of John Poston, Poston, of Suffolk. She brought him a dowry of £30,000. After her death, he made an even more advantaged second marriage, choosing Lady Elizabeth Hatton, Hatton, granddaughter of the great Cecil Lord Berkeley. Berkeley. The Berkeley family, the Cecils, were one of the three ruling families of England. Coates's political future was now assured. His first marriage had brought him money. His second marriage had brought him power. He had now become privy to the small inner circles of the men who actually ruled England. Coke had won Lady Elizabeth despite the fact that as a very desirable partner, she had been actively pursued by two of England's most powerful lords, the Earl of Essex and the Sir Francis Bacon. Essex was rumored to be the lover of Queen Elizabeth. Baker, a founder of the Rosicrucian Society, maintained secret alliances with Freemasons throughout Europe. In his continual quest for power, he was able to draw upon these sources for support. He also became Coates's principal rival in seeking the influential post of Chief Justice of Common Pleas. Again, Coates won that post. At the protege of Lord Berkeley, he was named Chief Justice of the King's Bench in 1613. In this office, he had the pleasure of prosecuting another former rival, that is the Earl of Essex, in 1600. Later, he was the prosecutor of Sir Walter Raleigh in 1603, and in 1605, he prosecuted the perpetrators of the gunpowder plots. When his daughter married the elder brother of the Duke of Buckingham as his wife home, Oaklands, Coates further cemented his growing political alliance throughout a long legal career. Coates dedicated himself to completing his monumental work on law, first published in 1628 as Coates Institutes, as it was also known as Coates on Littleton. Subsequent volumes of this work continued to appear until 1644. Coates' works remained the fundamental treatise on law, although it is seldom taught in American law schools. After the triumph of equity, the system of law merchant in our system of jurisprudence. Coke and Flatstone's works were relegated to remote shelves in the rare book rooms. The lasting influence of Coates' works may be attributed to his firm grounding in both Roman and Anglo-Saxon law. Coke returned to the principles of the ancient curites when he divided the people into two classes, the nobility and the commoner. This was a restatement of earlier legal division in Rome, the patriarchs or the gents and the plebs. Coke began his work with the statement, "Reason is the life of law. May the common law itself is nothing but reason." He continued with Latin maxim, "Nimium oponius eximum septorium legibus." No man, out of his own private reason, ought to be wiser than the law, which is the perfection of reason. Coke also commented in the Institutes that the common law of England is called right, sometimes common right, and sometimes communius justitio. He dwelled on the principle of ligations or liganganten, that is, the quality of allegiance as the highest and greatest obligation of duty and obedience. With the precepts, he had returned to that stern sense of duty which had guided the patriarchs of Rome and the establishment of the Roman Empire. It was just such a sense of duty which guided our founding fathers and such leaders as General Robert E. Lee. These basic qualities of Coke in his work later made to a great impression on the imprisoned poet Ezra Pound, who had been shut away without trial because of his obedience to such a stern sense of duty. Coke also spent much of his later life as a political prisoner. During his years as a prisoner, Pound was able to study the entire work of Coke, which has appeared in 4 parts. 1. The reprint of Littleton's treatise on Tender, which was to serve law students during ensuing centuries as their first textbook. 2. The text of various statutes of the Statute of Dinonis, D-O-N-I-S, and other statutes to Magna Carta, to James I James first. 3, criminal law. 4, the jurisdiction of the different courts of law. He later published his further studies at the law, that is Coates Reports, which appeared in 13 parts. Despite his powerful political patrons, Coke frequently found himself under attack by his many enemies. On February 26, 1620, he delivered an important speech on the problems of the scarcity of money, a statement which increased the number of his enemies by the number of those whose fortunes were made by trading in money. So we got a problem here, you can see. After much study of the problem, he found that the scarcity of money could be traced to 7 causes, which he enumerated as the turning of money into plate. 2, the use of gold folia in gilding. 3, the undervaluing of silver. 4, the East India Company, who intercepted dollars and other monies that would otherwise come into the kingdom and bring in for it nothing but toys and trifles. 5, the excess of imports over exports. Yeah, that's a key one there, folks. Just the same issue we have here in America. We bring tons of things imported in our country. We hardly export anymore. That's the problem. It's a major problem. People tell you it's not. It is. The 6th one is the French merchants for wine carry for 780,000 pounds per annum and bring nothing but wines and lace and such like trifles. And 7, the patent for gold and silver, lace and thread, which wastes our bullion and coin, hinders the bringing of it into the kingdom. Most of Coates' definition of the problem facing his nation 4 centuries ago is applied to the plight in the United States as we approach the 21st century. We too are plagued by excessive imports over exports. Correct. We import not only wine and lace, but oil and many other expensive products, when in reality we have it here in our own country, folks. It's done on purpose. They're lying to you, okay? Coates' emphasis on the necessity of maintaining the nation's supply of bullion echoes the preoccupation of our founding fathers when they inserted into the Constitution, that is, the specific provisions that lawful money should consist of gold and silver. However, it was Coates' open criticism of the activities of the East India Company which caused him to undergo the most severe pressure. This company represented then and for many years after the secret government of the British Empire. With full knowledge of this power, Coates refused to hold his tongue when most prudent men would have remained silent. The passion for justice which he ruled his life was not confined to the courtroom, but was applied to every realm of life. Chambers' Encyclopedia notes that from 1606, Coke stood on the champion of national liberties, opposing any illegal encroachments of both church and crown. He openly criticized the Spanish marriage of King James I, who married a Catholic. This marriage resulted in a civil war, the end of the Stuart dynasty in England, and the Glorious Revolution. King James I responded to this criticism by sending Coke to the Tower of London. This so-called imprisonment lasted for 9 months. Coke was released on August of 1622. While he was in prison, his enemies sought to close in on him. 5 different lawsuits were filed against him. He won them all. He was called up by government agents 4 times for lengthy examination on state interests, with no incriminating results. His chambers were repeatedly ransacked. Again, no evidence against him was found. Nonetheless, his private papers were seized and brought to the council to be searched. His victorious emergence from these trials later caused him to refer to his 7 great deliveries while in the Tower. For the remainder of his life, Coke remained under suspicion. In 1631, King Charles I gave orders that his papers should be secured, lest he be an influence on the people. However, Coke continued to denounce any interference by the crown with the liberties of Parliament. He opposed King Charles I's demands for additional subsidies of the crown. He continued to speak against illegal taxation, and he denounced the king's favorite, the Duke of Buckingham. For these reasons, his career as a citizen of England was illustrated as his career as a jurist and a legal scholar. After his imprisonment in the Tower of London, he was secluded in his home in Stoke Poges, P-O-G-E-S, on the news that he was seriously ill. A king's warrant had been prepared, that is SPD CCLXXI II, 65, and an envoy, Sir Francis Winebank, was sent to Stoke Pocus to seize Coke's personal papers. These effects were kept by the government for 7 years. Many of his most important manuscripts disappeared. Even his will was never returned to his heirs. They had to assign his belongings without the benefit of his testament. Sir Edward Coke died at Stoke Post on September 3rd, 1634. His personal story is typical of the treatment of a great man by envious and lesser rivals who knew how to abuse their government powers. Many years later, one of his descendants, Thomas Coke, was finally named Lord of Holkham. His present heir is known as the Viscount of Coke. Sir Edward Coke's long and fruitful life embraced the years of the British Empire's greatest power, which had been detained under Queen Elizabeth from 1558 to 1603. James I followed from 1603 to 1625, and then Charles I from 1625 to 1649. Coke had entertained Queen Elizabeth at his home in Stoke Post in 1601. During that visit, he presented her with gifts worth, at that time, more than £1,000. Coke's patron, Lord Burgundy, was Elizabeth's Secretary of State. Whether in spite of the illusory patronage, Coke never hesitated to challenge Elizabeth's successor, King James I. Coke's successful impeachment of Sir Francis Bacon was widely interpreted as a direct attack upon the authority of King James, and the king himself believed this was the case. Coke had stood before the king, citing Bracton to his face. The king should be subject to no man, but to God and the law. After King James' death, his enemies circulated the claim that he had been a homosexual, a slander which had been traced to but one originator, Anthony Weldon, that's Weldon, who has been excluded from court circles. As a consequence of this exile, he developed a pathological hatred of the Stuart family. He first penned the story about King James in 1650, 25 years after James' death. Antonio Fraser, a prominent historian, attributes the slanders to the fact that James had begun to suffer from early senility years before his death, causing peculiar unorthodox behavior. In support of King James, historians cited cardinal facts of his life that he was the first in history to unite the feuding tribes of Scotland into one nation, the man who united Scotland and England, and the man who encouraged the propagation of the Bible in the language of the people, the King James Version of the Bible. Hold on just a second. Let me get a glass of water. Sorry about that. Coke's impeachment of Sir Francis Bacon not only caused King James to imprison him, it also brought down upon him the wrath of the rapidly growing Masonic movement throughout Europe. Freemasons and their shock troops, the Illuminati, had continually sought to wreak their sinister program on the people through control of the legal system. To lose the Chief Justice of England was a serious setback to their plans. In retrospect, we can only wonder what he was not executed, as the death penalty was frequently employed punishment of political offenders. Apparently, the Cecil connection was too great, and Coke was allowed to die quietly at his home. The dictionary National Biography honors him with a effusion memorial in his mode of stating what he believes or wished to believe. He often reached a perfection of form, exhibiting that freedom from flaviousness and the careful use of terms which is essential to a good legal style. Legal historians have pointed out that perhaps never before or since has one man made so much law. We deny the right of the king to judge case personal or to give jurisdiction to ecclesiastical courts at the expense of the courts of the common law. He asserted it was unlawful to give a commission, such as a royal commission, power to hear and determine offenses which should be heard in ordinary courts. Such practices robbed the citizens of the protection of established law. Coke maintained that no martial law which was executed by military law should be carried out without following the common law process. He brilliantly expounded the common law, simultaneously defeating Sir Francis Bacon's project to codify the law, a tactic for which Bacon has apparently been engaged in by his Masonic co-conspirators. Masonic conspirators. Coke thus gave us an exposition of the common law, which has spread it throughout the English-speaking world. Coke laid down in Peckham's case, Peckham's case, 1615, that it is contrary to law to ask the judge separately before trial in a pending case to give their opinions in camera and ex parte. This practice has become a growing abuse in the American legal system. It was Sir Edward Coke, standing alone, who denied the right of the king to delay or stop proceedings in the common law courts. Coke further denied the right of the king to make law by proclamation. Good job. Good job. Coke's monumental institutes fixed the common law for the next 3 centuries and established the supremacy over the church, the admiralty, and the Star Chamber, and the code system of law, which was propounded by Sir Francis Bacon. Coke also established the supremacy over the royal prerogative through his insistence upon grand jury indictments, jury trial, protection against unlawful searches and seizures with which he himself was not protected, protection against double jeopardy, and the rights of habeas corpus. It seems impossible that one man could have done so much, and thus he remains an inspiration to all who share his passion for justice. Few Americans today are aware of Sir Edward Coke, influence upon our founding fathers. Our historians ignore Coke's great feat in backing the Petition of Right of 1628 in England, which directly challenged the ascension of King Charles I. King Charles not only ignored the Petition of Right, he continued on his arrogant course while his popular support steadily eroded. He was executed in 1649. The Petition of Right later became a major factor in the drafting of our Declaration of Independence and the Constitutional Bill of Rights. The rivalry between Sir Edward Coke and Sir Francis Bacon continued to affect the history of England long after both were gone. Ironically, it was Coke's challenge to the crown as an absolute monarchy which resulted in the limited monarchy which we find today in England. His challenge exposed the vulnerability of the absolute monarchy, a situation which was eagerly exploited by a group of bankers. Where from? Amsterdam. They financed Oliver Cromwell and his Puritan forces' military takeover of England, resulting in the execution of King Charles I. When Cromwell's death without a suitable heir led to the collapse of his dictatorship and the restoration of the monarchy with King Charles II, the Amsterdam bankers used their financial skills to cause unrest and economic chaos in England. After King James II succeeded Charles, the problems proved too much for him, and he was forced to leave the throne, being succeeded by William of Orange, the Amsterdam banker's choice, who became King William III. The event is known in history as the Glorious Revolution. The Glorious Revolution is a historical event which is little noted in the United States. It refers not to our own successful American Revolution, but to the even more monumentous Revolution of 1688 in England. No historian has noted that the history of the world since 1688 has been directed by the consequences of the Glorious Revolution, which not only ended the attempts of the Vatican to recover its extensive land holdings in England, which had been seized by King Henry VIII, but also resulted in the establishment of the Bank of England and its espionage service. Great Britain's notorious SIS, the Secret Intelligence Service, which in turn set up our own Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, under the name of Office of Strategic Services during World War II. This is all connected also, folks, with Tavistock, what he's talking about. I don't know if he talks about it, but that makes sense right there. That's part of Tavistock. It's part of the MI6 also from Dr. John Coleman's works. This all connects, folks. This is why it begins to come together. It starts to mesh, and you begin to figure out, okay, I see how this works. Okay, let's continue. The Glorious Revolution not only made possible the charting of the Bank of England, which was to become the world's most influential central bank, it also opened the door for the subsequent usurping of the English crown by the Illuminati in 1714, when George I, Duke of Hanover, ascended to the throne of England. Since that date, the English monarchy has been prominent in the world, shedding the machinations of the Freemason movement. The Amsterdam bankers have first subdued the English crown when they financed Oliver Cromwell's rule of England as a Calvinist dictator, controlling England as Lord High Protector from December 1653 to September 1658, when he died. After Charles II, King James II succeeded to the throne. A Stuart had converted to Catholicism in 1670. James married a Catholic, Mary of Modena, in 1673, and launched a campaign to rescind more than 100 years of Protestant rule in England by returning the nation to the fold of the Roman hierarchy. However, this goal was strongly resisted by the great majority of English people, who were Protestants and had no wish to return to submission to Rome. At first, James' crusades were not taken too seriously in England because he had two daughters who had been baptized as Protestants. However, he now had a son and heir who was baptized as a Catholic, ensuring that the throne of England would descend to a Catholic prince. It was this birth which provoked the Glorious Revolution against him. A small group of English aristocrats, led by the kingmaker, the Duke of Devonshire, with his associate, the Duke of Marlborough, sent a cryptic letter to William at The Hague, inviting him to take the throne of England. William had married James's daughter, but his claim could only be exercised legally as the demise of James and his Catholic heir. James further angered the English people in June of 1688 when he jailed 7 bishops in the Tower of London. Their offense was that they had refused to read his latest proclamation about religion from their pulpits. The bishops were then tried by a jury and were acquitted on all counts. At the time of the Glorious Revolution, King James had an army of 40,000 men led by carefully chosen officers, all of whom were Roman Catholics. The challenger, William of Orange, had only 13,000 men. That's a big difference there. To compound his problems, his fleet was blown off course and missed their landing spot. The Duke of Devonshire hastened to their rescue and received William's daughter, Princess Anne, at his castle. James was then informed that despite his superior numbers, his troops would not obey their Catholic officers, and he had little chance of succeeding against the invaders. He advocated to France. He aborted an attempt to make a comeback in Ireland, also met with defeat. William was now King William III, the King of England. He signed a Declaration of Rights on February 13, 1689, which ended the king's power to suspend the deliberation of Parliament or dispense with his laws, which had been the goal of Sir Edward Coke's mission. Coke's petition of right had now become the law of the land. England has been a constitutional monarchy ever since. The official release of the BI, the British Information Services, the propaganda arm of England, states that the United Kingdom is a parliamentary democracy with a limited constitutional monarchy. Government is carried on by Her Majesty government in the name of the Queen, who reigns but does not rule. The Queen is an integral part of Parliament. The Declaration of Rights in 1689 was followed by an even more powerful contract between the English monarchy and the people of England, the Act of Succession of 1701. This act specifically barred the Stuarts from ever again claiming the throne. The act further placed the Hanover line of Germany, which was waiting in the wings, in direct line of succession. It specified that all future monarchs must belong to the Anglican Church, that is, the Church of England. It specifically barred Catholics from the throne. Later monarchs received the title of head of the Church of England. Other clauses of the act secure parliamentary supremacy by requiring that the monarch must go to Parliament each year and request his annual stipend. The royal household now existed as a pleasure of Parliament, which controlled its purse strings. In 1694, King William III chartered the Bank of England. Since that day, there has never been another revolution in England. A history of civil wars and revolution against the throne has come to an end. A privately owned central bank, the Bank of England, now controls the issue of money, which has formerly been a royal prerogative. The throne goodwill was secured by the assignment of a large number of shares to the royal family. The sudden asset to funds provided by the Bank of England ushered in the great flowering of English culture and international prestige. The bank's monetary manipulation created enormous fortune for its shareholders, and great estates were built throughout the countryside. The fortunate few who had invited William to take the English throne and who had subsequently been invited to become chartered subscribers to the bank for £10,000 each, that is the equivalent of $10 million in today's currency, made certain the success of the glorious revolution. One of these chosen few, the Duke of Devonshire, was appointed Lord High Steward of England by King William, given a seat on the Privy Council, namely Steward of the royal household, and given the coveted award, the most noble order of the Garter. After William's death, his daughter, now Queen Anne, continued the Duke's appointment as Steward of the royal household. Continue. Queen Anne married Prince George of Denmark. Although 17 children were produced, they all died. Anne was extremely self-indulgent and was piled with rich foods by her solicitous staff. She became very fat and endured poor health because of her excesses, which finally caused her death. Once again, the throne of England was a matter of contest. Historians have suspected that Queen Anne's overindulgence were deliberately encouraged by some of her staff to ensure that there would be no heir to the throne. She ruled from 1702 until her death in 1714. The successful claimant who replaced Queen Anne was the Elector of Hanover in Germany. Although he was merely the head of a small principality, the Elector was descended from Henry the Lion from 1129 to 1195. Henry the Lion, Duke of Saxony, was the only son of Henry the Proud and was a prominent member of the Guelph Guelph dynasty. At that time, the fate of Europe was contended for by two opposing forces: the Guelphs, representing the new black nobility, and the descendants from Canaanites or Phoenicians, that is to see Mullen's Curse of Canaan, and the Gibeonites, who represent the ancient Teutonic Knights and the ruling dynasty of Europe. Frederick of Barbarossa, a member of the Hohenstaufen family, was head of the Gibeonites during the time of Henry the Lion. Henry the Lion persuaded the Hohenstaufers to make peace with the Guelphs, known as Welfs in that area of Europe. Henry, whose capital was Brunswick, a city later to figure important in the development of the Illuminati movement, married Matilda, daughter of Henry II, King of England. The Hanovers later came into possession of the Gospel Book, that is a 12th century manuscript from the Abbey of Helmholtz, which sold it to the King of Hanover in 1861. In 1983, the family put it up for sale. It was purchased by a consortium of German interests in 1983 for $11,912,000. The Hanover family has spent some 20 years diligently preparing the claim to the throne of England. Their official genealogist and historian was one of the most well-known scholars of Europe, Godfrey William Leibniz, 1646 to 1716, Liebniz. Leibniz had been secretary of the Rosicrucian Society in Nuremberg in 1567. He then moved to Frankfurt, where he was employed by the Elector of Mons from 1676 until his death in 1716. Not only did he serve the Brunswick family loyalty as their historian, he was also a lawyer and served them as a judge and administrator. His massive work, Codex Juris Gentilum Diplomaticus Hanoveri, not only traced the descendant from Henry the Lion, who had married into the British royal family, it also documented the later developments. Elizabeth, one of King James's first Protestant daughters, had married Frederick V, the Elector of Palatine. Their daughter, Sophia, married Ernest Augustus, the first Elector of Hanover. Although Sophia was not a claimant to the English throne, having died before Queen Anne, her son, who was now Elector of Hanover, was able to overcome the other claimants by his sheer weight of Leibniz's tremendous amount of research. Thus, Leibniz, secretary of Rosicrucian Society, not only brought the Hanovers to the throne of England, with him came the fraternity known as the Freemasons. Because of this mystical connection, Leibniz, who founded such esoteric systems as economic science and many other branches of physical science, was a close correspondent with his fellow Rosicrucian Sir Francis Bacon in England, a historic opponent of Sir Edward Coke. Bacon, subsequently given the title of Baron Baronium, authored a book, The New Atlantis, which describes the purpose of the House of Solomon. Nicolay, that is Nico, LAI, among others, has ascribed to this celebrated romance the origin of Masonry in its present form. Leibniz was at the very heart of the new intellectual movement of the 18th century, a spirit of liberalism and humanism, which has been traced directly back to the ancient cult of Baal, which is in his book, The Curse of Canaan. He was a major influence in the development of a legal doctrine reaffirming doctrines of Christian natural law, which originated in the Golden Renaissance of the 15th century. His writings shaped the thinkings of Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson in their phrasing of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States. In addition to providing intellectual inspiration for the American Revolution, Leibniz's writings also became the inspiration for the Industrial Revolution. It was his influence which led Benjamin Franklin to establish the American Philosophical Society. Franklin served as colonial postmaster general and carried on a worldwide correspondence. By the way, postmaster general is one of the most important positions in this country. Very few people know that. He went to England in 1757. The following year, he worked with Matthew Boulton, Boulton, Jr. on electricity, metallurgy, and the harnessing of steam power. Josiah Wedgwood, the potter, and Boulton's personal physician, Erasmus Darwin, organized a group which duplicated the aims of Franklin's Junto, Junto, in Philadelphia. The organization be known as Junto of Birmingham. I've never even heard of the group, sorry. It was later known as the Lunar Society through the influence Manchester by the year 1790 had become a major industrial power. Boulton, Boulton, built a massive Soho works, the first great manufacturing plant. It used water through a system of canals and steam power. The so-called Soho plant became well known as the headquarters of the Lunar Society. With Lebrett's able assistant, the Elector of Hanover became George I, King of England in 1714. He spoke no English and stubbornly refused to learn a single word. Only German was spoken at the royal court in London. He ruled from 1714 to 1727. George II ruled from 1727 to 1760, and George III, whose name figure is so prominent in American history, ruled after 1760, placing him in a crucial role of provoking the American colonists until they erupted into a revolution. He was succeeded by William IV in 1830, and in 1837, the granddaughter of King George III, Victoria, became queen. She married Prince Albert of the German province of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, whose family name was Wettin, W-E-T-T-I-N, during the First World War. This sounded suspiciously German, and it was legally changed to Windsor. I didn't know that. Very important key there. The name by which the present royal family of England is known. The Glorious Revolution unleashed many currents in history which remain strong today. The European battle between the rival forces of Protestant and Catholic were exacerbated by the ascension of William the Orange of 1688. For more than 100 years, the historic enemies, England and France, had been at peace. William changed this arrangement by joining the League of Augsburg against France, which resulted in 7 wars between England and France between 1689 and 1815. The alliance of France with the rebelling American colonies was but one minor aspect of this long-standing struggle. One legacy of this rout was the present contemporaries between Protestant and Catholics in Ireland. The Protestants proudly waved banners depicting their great patron, William Orange. William's participation in the League of Augsburg was but one aspect of the growing conspiratory works of the Mason. The League was essentially a Masonic foreign policy apparat, which was determined to destroy the traditional balance of power between the reigning monarchs of Europe, finally displacing them by setting up their own world order. You can look at this at his book, The World Order by Eustace Mullins. In effect, Leibniz and his fellow intellectuals, with the ascent of George I in 1714 to the throne of England, became the secret powers behind the throne. In 1717, it was announced that the Freemasons were officially revived in England. From this base of power, Lord Sackville was dispatched to Italy in 1733 to set up Freemason lodges there. In 1735, Lord Derwentwater was sent to Paris to organize a Grand Lodge. The result was the destruction of monarchies in these nations. through the secret forces which led to revolution. England was finally able to dispatch its great rival, France, and to end its claim to world power. The new order was announced at the Congress of Vienna in 1815, when the triumph Masons, led by the banking power of the Rothschilds, dictated their terms not only to France, but to other nations of Europe. Financed by the monetary power of the Bank of England, enforced by the British Navy, and worldwide intrigues of the Second Intelligence Service, the Masons were well on their way to fulfilling their historical goals. Leipzig's accomplices, that is, Sir Francis Bacon, had paved the way as the apostate of the new humanism in England. He thus imposed on this nation his interpretation of the ancient rites of Baal, that is, the cult of Canaan, and the predecessors of predecessors of Europe's black nobility. He is one of the founders of the Rosicrucians, that is, the Knights of the Rosy Cross, and the group known as the Free and Accepted, that is, speculative Masons, who had departed from the functions of the Masons as a craft organization. Scholars had identified much of Bacon's work as reflected in the Rosicrucian Manifesto. Under the Hanovers, the Freemasons were able to step up their own monopoly of secret societies in England. On the 12th day of July, 1798, an act was passed in Great Britain known as the Sedition Act for the suppression of secret societies. In his definite work, The Brotherhood, the Secret World of the Freemasons, Stephen Knight complains that the Masons have never complied with the stringent requirements for listing their members under this act. However, he seems unaware that the act specifically exempts the Freemasons from compliance. Its language reads, and whereas certain societies have long been accustomed to being holden in this kingdom under the denominations of Lodge of Freemasonry, the meetings whereof have been in great measure directed to charitable purposes, be it therefore enacted that nothing in this act shall extend to the meetings of any such society or lodge which shall, before the passing of this act, have been usually holden under this said denomination and in conformity to the rules prevailing among the said societies of Freemasons. In effect, this act banned all secret societies except the Freemasons. Such a powerful ban reflected the active participation of the now reigning family in England, the Hanovers, in the lodges. From 1782 to 1790, the Grand Master of England was His Royal Highness Henry Frederick, Duke of Cumberland. From 1791 to 1812, His Royal Highness George, Prince of Wales, who subsequently became King George IV from 1812 to 1842. His Royal Highness Augustus Frederick, Duke of Sussex, son of King George III. The Dukes of Sussex united the rival lodges, the ancient and the modern, into a single potent force. Thomas Howard, the Catholic Duke of Norfolk, had been Grand Master in 1730, despite many Catholic edicts issuing against membership in the Freemason movement. Several earls, that is, Earl of Strangmore, had also been Grand Master of England. A. Strangmore married the Duke of York, later King George V, and is now Queen Mother of England. A century after the passing of Sir Edward Coke, another great legal scholar, appeared in England. His name was Sir William Blackstone, publishing his monumental commentaries in 1765. Blackstone continued in expanding Coke's words by further defining the language and the principles of the common law. In Book 1 of his commentaries, he lays down the three absolute rules of civil liberties: 1, the right of personal security; 2, the right of personal liberty; and 3, the right to private property. Blackstone's divided the law into the rights of persons and the right of things, private wrongs as opposed to civil or public wrongs, and crimes and misdemeanors. In section 2 of his commentary, he writes that the inornatio juris quota quicid tantator serial nemine escut. Ignorance of the law is no excuse, because who can ignore God's will? Became the present day legal maxim. Ignoramus non excusatio legum. Ignorance of the law is no excuse. This was further qualified by the presence of fraud, or a mistake, in fact, as inornatio facto excusatio. Sir William Blackstone was born in 1723. He was called to the bar in 1746 and was named Solicitor General to the Queen in 1761. Like his predecessor, Sir Edward Coke, He also had a powerful benefactor, Prime Minister Sir Robert Walpole, Walpole, who named him the prestigious foundation of the Charterhouse School and the Oxford Exclusive Fellow of All Souls. The commentaries appeared in 4 volumes, the first brought out in 1765, and the other 3 volumes appearing over the next 4 years. He made £14,000 from the sale of the commentaries, an enormous sum for that age. The commentaries also proved to be a great influence on the legal doctrines of the United States for the next century. They were finally supplanted by a native product, that is Kent's commentary, as the basic textbook for American lawyers. Didn't know that. Didn't know any of these 2 things right here. Pretty important. Calvinism, a stern branch of Protestantism which had originated in Switzerland under the aegis of the French leader Calvin, had played an important role in the winning of England from the Catholic Stuart dynasty. That is, Oliver Cromwell had been an ardent Calvinist, as was the eventual victor over the Stuarts, William of Orange. After the American Revolution, an adept combination of Calvinist and Masonic influences were brought to bear as the Constitutional Convention. Although the principles of Sir Edward Coke had been a contributing influence in the writing of the Declaration of Independence and survived the Bill of Rights, which was a belated addition to the Constitution, the convention itself was dominated by Episcopalians, that is, for all intents and purposes, by a branch of the Anglican Church and by a strong Jesuit presence. However, the guiding principles of the convention were laid down by Freemasons, many of whom were also members of other dominant groups. Bradford notes that Daniel Carroll represented the state of Maryland at the convention. He was a brother of the Archbishop of Baltimore and was a Mason as well as a Catholic. The convention purported to draft the Constitution as the final protector of the rights of independent citizens against any oppressive force of government. However, as we have previously noted, the Bill of Rights was added not as an afterthought, but as a device to ensure the adoption of the Constitution. Much of the work of the convention was mere window dressing to conceal its real purpose, which was to establish a strong central government with legal authority to provide repayments of loans made to the Americans by British finances. That is correct. Principally those who were also stockholders of the Bank of England. The new government was also commissioned to insist upon the repayment of mortgages to British lenders, which the post-revolution courts, notably led by George Wythe, W-Y-T-H-E, a drafter of the Constitution and called the father of our legal system, duly demanded from the debtors. On July 9, 1778, meeting in Philadelphia, Congress had approved the Articles of Confederation, which then became the ruling body of law for the young nation. These articles established the principles of state rights, the principles of state rights, and effectively ruled out the possibility of a strong central government, a federal power. When the Constitutional Convention met in Philadelphia on May 27, 1787, its secret agenda was to emasculate the Articles of Confederation. Thank you. Finally, someone really figures it out here. This is with another particular book I have here, and I'll have to discuss that. Yes. And to authorize the establishment of a strong federal government. The delegate who was entrusted with the task of carrying out this secret mission was Edmund Randolph. During the previous year, Randolph had been elected Grand Master of the Masonic Lodge of Virginia. His father, a leading Tory and King's attorney, had returned to England at the outbreak of the American Revolution. He never returned to America. Edmund Randolph opened his plan with an unexpected strong attack on the Articles of Confederation. He claimed that the Confederation fulfilled none of its objectives for what it was framed. He then listed a number of objectives to the Articles among them. It is not superior to state constitution. Thus, we see that the Confederation is incompetent to any one object for which it was instituted. Our chief danger arises from the democratic parts of our Constitution. Although one might have expected cries of outrage from the defenders of liberty who are present, none were made. In fact, most of those assembled were like-minded. The few who might have objected preferred to remain silent and go along with the crowd. Randolph's proposal received strong and concerted support from his fellow Masons at the convention. He then worked out a constitution which largely scrapped the Articles of Confederation and replaced it with a constitution which authorized a strong, centralized federal government. That's the problem, folks. Centralization is the problem because that's where all the power is laid at. If it was kept that as the Articles of Confederation, it was a loose league. It meant there was no strong part of the central, meaning that they were not going to have power over the people. A cloak of concealment was thrown over the creation by the hasty addition of the Bill of Rights, intended as a SOP, I guess it meant SOP to those who otherwise would never have voted for ratification. Well hidden within the basic frameworks of the Constitution were Masonic plans and authorization for a national judicial power which would exercise final authority in disagreements between the branches of government, while the national executive power was given little opportunity to enforce the Bill of Rights. Continue. During the first few years of the Republic, the national judicial was discreetly quiet. The Supreme met in a basement room and appeared to be little more than an ornamental power within the government. However, it is asserted itself shortly when John Marshall became Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Correct. Another correction. Correct. He had recently succeeded Edmund Randolph as Grand Master of the Virginia Lodge, which had played a major political and judicial role ever since. Marshall made his first bold bid in 1803 as his well-known case, Marlborough versus Madison. Marshall's court ruled that the judicial had the power to strike down any law. That's not right, folks. See, he's already taken the position well over what it should be, but you can see this is all part. This is a great thing. This is excellent information, folks. This is really good. The legal background of Marlborough versus Madison was that it was a brazen exercise in partisan politics. The case became a cause celebrated after James Madison, the Secretary of State, worked far into the night, hastily signing commissions for members of the Federalist Party on his last day in office. On the following morning, Thomas Jefferson came in as the new Secretary of State. Because Madison was a stalwart of opposing Federalism Party, Jefferson threw Marlborough's commission into a waste basket, even though Madison had signed it. Marlborough then brought suit to claim his due appointment as Justice of the Peace. That is, Chief Justice Marshall, who was also a leading member of the Federalist Party, ruled in favor of the plaintiff and awarded Marlborough his commission, a decision delivered along strict by party lines. Remember, the party's name at that point was Marlborough, was named Federalist Party, meaning they were very much in for the federal government being the power. You had the anti-federalists that was opposing this in the past. Marshall's decision created the precedent for the supremacy of the federal judicial. He did. He's correct. Completely correct. That was not what it was supposed to be about. That's over 200 years ago, folks. On September 3rd, 1807, Marshall delivered another famous ruling in U.S. versus Burr, B-U-R-R, as reported by Mr. Ritchie. He declared that the laws of the several states could not be regarded as rules of decision in trials for offense against the United States. So here we go. You see the power of the centralization beginning to start whittling away the states' rights. You remember now, I've said this before, at one time, the country's name was United States of America, yes, but the U was not capitalized, meaning that the power belonged to the states. But someone fell asleep at the switch here. Because no man could be condemned or imprisoned in the federal courts under a state law. So there's the separation beginning. This legal decision came about because Marshall's role as one of the usual suspects for many years. Aaron Burr had been one of the most active Masonic conspirators in the New Republic. He had plotted to set up a separate and independent republic in the states bordering the Mississippi River. When Burr was charged with treason for this plot, he was defeated by the attorney Edwin Randolph, a former Grand Master of the Lodges of Virginia. Sitting as judge at this important case was Justice Marshall, who was then Grand Master of the Lodges of Virginia. This decision was a foregone conclusion because Masonic law decrees that a Mason must always rule in favor of his fellow Mason due to his obligations. Correct. Despite the success of Edmund Randolph and his federal Masons in writing a constitution which gave the federal government supremacy over the states, many legal authorities continue to cast doubts on the validity of that power until the Civil War silenced forever the Americans who still oppose a strong federal power. In Sturgis versus Crowninshield, 4S Wheaton 193, Chief Justice of the United States observed that the powers of the states remain after the adoption of the Constitution what they were before, except so far as they have been abridged by that instrument. During the 19th century, the available legal textbook for American lawyers was Kent Commentaries. In Book 1, page 490, Kent comments on the Marlborough, Massachusetts. I can't get this out of my mind here. Marlborough versus Madison decision. Here's the quote. The question, says the Chief Justice, was whether an act repugnant to the Constitution can become a law of the land. The powers of the legislature are defined and limited by a written Constitution. But to what purpose is that limitation if those limits may at any time be passed? The distinction between a government with limited and unlimited powers is abolished if these limits do not confine the persons on whom they are imposed, and acts prohibited and acts allowed are of equal obligation. If the Constitution does not control any legislation act repugnant to it, then the legislature may alter the Constitution by an ordinary act. The theory of every government with a written Constitution must be that an act of government repugnant to the Constitution is void. And I'm going to stop here for a break, folks. Again, thank you for being here. And it's going over much longer than I thought it would be. And it's about an hour and 21 minutes here. We're going to take a break, and we'll come back a little later. Thank you for being here. Again, my name is Brant Hunt. We're doing the Rape of Justice, Chapter 2 tonight, which is a very important book to read. And we're going to continue this tonight, hopefully. And thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, I'll try to answer them. But this is a great piece of work by Eustace Mullins in his book, The Rape of Justice. Thank you.